Eso. Y con eso empezamos, ¿cierto? Baja la luz y empezamos. Okay, right on time. Welcome everyone again. This is the first keynote of the Media Art Histories Conference. We are gonna start with an exercise of imagination. Picture an agave plant in your head. Picture an agave plant. Then picture many agave plants. Place those plants in mountains. And now, put in those mountains fantastic old colonial buildings. That is the city where the tequila comes from. And it's the city where our first keynote speaker comes from. Gabriela Aceves Sepúlveda was one of the most accomplished scholars in the Latin American context of the media arts and history. She's originally from Mexico and currently teaches at SFU, Simon Fraser University in Canada. And it's been like that for the last decade. She has a very influential and important book in the history of feminism and the arts, especially in Mexico. It's called Women Made Visible, Feminist Art in Post-1968 Mexico. She's working in new projects, connecting with this study of feminism and the interrelation with media art, with film, that goes beyond Mexico as well. Some of those endeavors go to places like Colombia. For instance, she's interested now in Jacqueline Nova and other female composers from Uruguay and Argentina. I'm delighted that Gabriela accepted to be a keynote because her perspective of feminist studies and media art history is incredibly important. She's been devoted every second of her life to study this field, and is actually here been spending a lot of time already in archives, for instance, at Biblioteca Nacional in Bogota, preparing her new research. Without further ado, I just want to say, bienvenida, esta es tu casa, and please help me welcome Gabriela to Festival de la Imagen and Media Art Histories.
Muchas gracias, Andrés, por esa presentación. Thank you very much to the organizers of the Regenerative Media Arts Conference 2025. It is a great pleasure to be here. Es un placer enorme estar aquí en Manizales con todos ustedes. It is truly special for me to give this talk here because I value very much the efforts to situate Manizales as an important center of the media arts community. These efforts are incredibly significant for me, both as an artist and a historian, pero especialmente como una mexicana comprometida en descentrar las narrativas históricas de las artes mediáticas de los centros dominantes. Thanks to the organizers for all the energy invested in making this happen here in Manizales and also in Bogota. So before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that most of the work that I will present to you today was developed as a diasporic subject, one that travels between Guadalajara, Mexico, the land of tequila, but of many other things, and the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, otherwise known as Vancouver, British Columbia, where I live and work. It is informed by the work of many members of the media arts community, who I consider to be my community, and by conversations with many people in this audience, as well as many more who couldn't join us and who have supported and also challenged my work. So to begin, I would like to reflect on the theme of the conference, regenerative, which signals an iterative, recursive process of production and reproduction, and points to the biological capacity for restoring, replacing, and healing. The first part of this compound word, generative, shares the same roots with the word generations, which is used to define or categorize groupings of people born and living at the same time, often sharing cultural and historical experiences. The prefix re adds to both words the ability to renew, reinvent, reimagine, to change direction, to return, and to counter fixed meanings and identities. In short, regenerative points to the capability of living beings to renew, reinvent, restore, and heal themselves, and specifically to the human ability to create and modify cultural and historical frames of reference. So taking a cue from the theme of the conference today, I will present parts of my research on feminist media art histories, as well as a methodology to propose other frames of reference or points of departures to narrate the histories of media art, or what I refer to as to generate other futures for our pasts. So combining media archaeology and a feminist praxis, I have been researching the contributions of Latin American artists to the histories of media arts for more than a decade, centering on women's contributions, where women is understood as a category marked by an expansiveness extending beyond a binary system. I have traced genealogies of artists experimenting with sound, from the early musical notations by Uruguayan Carmen Barradas to the electroacoustic and electronic compositions by Mexican Alicia Urreta, Argentinian Beatriz Ferreira, and Colombian Jacqueline Nova. I have researched the early generations of feminist film collectives such as Cine Mujer México, directed by Rosa Marta Fernández, Cine Mujer Colombia, and networks of feminist political filmmaking and organizing in Latin America. I have also traced histories of video art by looking at exchanges and exhibitions across the Americas. And I have situated how women video artists in Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, Chile, and Colombia develop unique engagements between self and technology and challenge dominant perceptions about the gendering of technology by constructing audiovisual languages that counter stereotypical gender representations, while at the same time reinscribing the female body as a site of violence and political potential. This research has made visible how these generations of Latin American women artists enabled and supported engagements across media, technology, and artistic genres, at times anticipating our current interest in new materialisms, embodied cognition, somatic ways of knowing, and human and non-human relations. And mostly, I've argued how they have developed audiovisual and performative languages that subvert, resignify, and regenerate dominant frames of reference in art, media, and technology. From Chilean Lottie Rosenfeld's famous alterations of the traffic sign, seen here performing an art action outside the Vancouver courthouses, an exhibition that was part of Women Art in the Periphery, organized by Sarah Diamond and Karen Knights in 1988, where she is remaking her iconic A Mile of Crosses on the Pavement, to Peruvian Victoria Santa Cruz, powerful reclamations of Afro-Peruvian pride and self-identity through performance and video, and finally, to what Mexican Monica Mayer calls artivism, a mix of performance, participatory, conceptual, trans, and interdisciplinary art, as well as curation and archiving as a political, committed feminist art and activist practice. So listening and learning from these generations of women has led me to develop a feminist methodology through the broad lens of research creation. This methodology has given shape to a series of interactive art projects, as well as scholarly publications developed individually and collectively through my research studio, Critical Media Art Studio, at Simon Fraser University. Today, I will specifically discuss the participatory performance work by Monica Mayer and her curatorial practice based on reactivating archives in collaboration with US-born Mexican-based curator Karen Cordero and feminist activist, archivist, photographer Ana Victoria Jimenez, and the work of Mexican video artist Paula Weiss, and her conception of the Portapac camera as an mnemonic device and an extension of the self as key influences for the methodology that I will share with you today on reactivation, remediation, and reenactment as a strategy to stage feminist interventions in the Media Arts Archive. So let's begin by establishing what I call feminist interventions in the archive. What you will see in the background are images by various artists, but I added credits where they, so you can see whose work I am referring. So feminist interventions in the archives of media art place emphasis on making visible and audible and also experiential or embodied how things, ideas, and people travel. And in doing so, these interventions pay attention to multidirectional flows, decentering unidirectional hegemonic patterns from what is commonly understood center to periphery. These interventions understand history as a web of synchronous events across geographical locations, as a continuum of information flows that are passed down across, sideways, or transversely from generation to generation through multidirectional travel and cross-pollination. These interventions narrate their stories, a series of encounters, friendship exchanges, and filial networks. Following Chilean sociologist Julieta Kirkwood, the interventions that I propose are cautious of using terms such as pioneers or innovators, because these terms enshrine individuals, promote silos and competition that reproduce patriarchal and linear understandings of historical temporality. They shut down the possible understanding of media art history in the singular, and as a linear progression towards mastery based on pseudo-universal involves not only its contents and its omissions, but its process of creation. This understanding of archive as process proposes to look at archives as epistemological experiments. In other words, as living contested sites of the production of knowledge, and not reenactments as powerful and valid archival mechanisms in the process of knowledge transfer from generation to generation. These diverse configurations of the archive have played a critical role in questioning the authority of those who determine what is historically valuable and in dismantling dominant structures that have erased diverse ways of being and understanding the world. Building from this critique, the feminist interventions in the archives of media art that I propose go beyond a mere recovery of women's voices and their presence in the archive. This intervention also seeks to make visible and audible how women are agents of the archive, or what Kate Ahern defines as being producers and enablers of archives. In other words, it seeks to highlight the roles in organizing, activating, and resignifying events, practices, and lived experiences that are not commonly seen, written about, or listened to within the archives of media arts, and to consider how these practices carry in and of themselves ways of creating, sorting, and organizing knowledge, and also ways of validating what should be archived and how it should be archived. So in what follows, I will describe two main encounters I've had with the archive and its agents to frame my approach to remediation, reactivation, and reenactment as a feminist intervention to suggest other futures for our past. These two encounters with the archives, as I've described before, took places between the cities of Vancouver, Guadalajara, and Mexico City, as I was researching the practices of Mexican feminist activists and artists in 1970s Mexico for what would become my doctoral thesis and later published as a monograph. So, as a historian, my first encounter with the archive with a capital A not surprisingly happened at the Mexican National Archives and in various libraries and special collections in the city. But perhaps not as expected, I also encountered several archives with lowercase a in the homes of many artists and scholars who generously welcome me into their homes and share their experiences and memories while I listen attentively to them in their living rooms or in their kitchens or as I look through their photo albums. This experience led me to comprehend how personal memories and domestic interiors serve as evidence of history, or as historian Antoinette Burton argues, for the understanding of the home, not just as a dwelling space for women's memory, but as an archival source and foundational to the writing of history. So as I was traveling back and forth between Mexico and Canada, I saw Monica Meyer's now iconic installation, El Tendedero, or the clothesline, in the Vancouver Art Gallery in 2009. As part of the first comprehensive exhibition of feminist art, WAC, Art and the Feminist Revolution, curated by Connie Butler. Here, seen as it was originally installed in 1978 in the Museum of Modern Art in Mexico City, as part of the exhibition Salón 77, Nuevas Tendencias, which brought together 59 international artists and national artists to reflect on how industrialization and modernization had ushered important transformations in the urban landscape of Mexico City, by then already considered one of the largest settlements in the world. El Tendedero shows a series of pieces of paper hung from a string in a structure that resembles a clothesline. In each paper, Meyer wrote the phrase, quote, "As a woman, what I most dislike about the city is," end quote. And before hanging them in the structure, as we see in the picture, Meyer distributed the papers in the streets of Mexico City, asking women to write down the responses to the questions. The responses range from feeling threatened to being called names to being physically harassed. Viewers in the exhibition were also invited to write responses. So as I was shifting through old documents in the archives with a capital A and visiting collections, El Tendedero began to catch my attention, not only as one of the first feminist participatory art installations produced by a self-identified feminist artist, but as an archive of sorts, as a collection of documents of a similar subject tied together, forming a group, one that resembles earlier forms of systems of filing important things. Thus, by recording what women detested about the city, Meyer considered how the female body was sexualized and threatened throughout the streets of Mexico City. By presenting it in a museum of modern art, Meyer not only elevated women's everyday life experience to the status of art, but also pointed to the absences in the archive by creating a public record of how women experience forms of violence in the face of rapid urbanization. Thinking of Tendedero as an archive of sorts because it resembles one due to its form, but also because it interrogates and furthers the notion of the archive through the kind of information it seeks to record, how it does so, and to what ends, led me to investigate how other artists and activists were recording information about how their bodies experience changes in the context of this urban landscape, and how they were recording these changes in the context of the reemergence of the feminist movement in the 1970s and increased access and importance of audiovisual technology, video, television, broadcasting, and film as archival technologies, which mark an important shift in intellectual production practices and practices of record keeping from writing as being the most predominant form towards using audiovisual technology. So in this context, El Tendedero can also be read as a technology of inscription, a technological device that recorded the embodied soundscapes of Mexico City as experienced by women in the streets and made them available to others who read the responses or wrote their own responses in the museum. So understanding El Tendedero as a technology of inscription, that is, a recording device, follows Bernard Stiglitz' theorization of writing as one of the earliest mnemonic technologies. While Meyer recorded the experiences of women in the streets of Mexico City through writing, Paula Weiss also began to use her portapack to produce records of how bodies were gendered, classed, and racialized throughout the streets of Mexico City. In the video Somos Mujeres and Ciudad Mujer Ciudad, also shown at Salón 77, Paula Weiss combined her signature rapid camera movements, psychedelic dissolves, chroma key effects, and live feedback to represent how indigenous and mestizo middle-class women experience the urban environment. In the 1970s, video technology in Latin America was scarce and expensive. Only artists with economic means and the right connections could afford to experiment with such technology. Many porta-packs were brought to the region via individual artists, such as the porta-pack brought to Brazil by João Tobab Zuley, which was used and shared by Anabela Geiger, Leticia Parente, and Sonia Andrade. In some areas, the television industry, which was increasingly adopting video technology in live broadcast, played a crucial role in providing access to video technology for artistic experimentation. Unlike elsewhere, many artists in the region experimented with emergent television broadcasting technologies, closed-circuit television, live feedback, time delays, and so on, to question the art establishment and comment on the influence of mass media in the public domain. Important examples of these practices were developed at the Instituto Torcuato Di Tella, as we all know, in Buenos Aires, as early as 1966, which we saw in the previous slides. Roberto Jacobi popularized the concept of mass media art, and artist Marta Minujín experimented with video broadcasting technology. So while dominant histories of video art tend to highlight male artists who were involved in their invention, as we know, the introduction of the portable video camera to consumer markets, as we know the porta-pack, occurred alongside the international reappearance of feminism as a political movement in the early 70s. This convergence made video one of the most sought-after means of expression for women artists who were marginalized by dominant modes of media and political representation and by the patriarchal structures of the art world. The portable video camera facilitated the exploration of the intimate and the domestic, while the videotape provided a wide range of options for independent distribution, international exchanges, and circulation of video-based projects that gave women artists a greater voice and presence in the visual arts and mass media, allowing many to develop and theorize an embodied relation with their porta-packs. In Mexico, Paula Weiss began to collaborate with both state and private television in 1974, and soon after she declared herself to be a teleasta, a producer of televisual images. She obtained a bachelor's degree in political science with the first thesis produced in video in 1975. A year later, she established RTV, her own production company, and was appointed as professor at the Faculty of Communication at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, where she championed alternative uses of video technology and supported the production of several video theses. Following the theories of Rudolf Arnheim, Paula Weiss argued for the recognition of audiovisual technology as a valid form of intellectual exploration vis-à-vis the predominance of the verbal and written focus of academia. Until she took her own life in 1990, Paula Weiss produced a series of television programs and artistic videos to develop an alternative to commercial television and fostered active and critical viewers. Through her experiments with the porta-pack, she conceived video as a mnemonic device and proposed different fusions of self and other through experimentations across a range of artistic genres, which led her to develop her own categories to understand her media explorations. Like other female artists working with video at the time, Paula Weiss, as I said, proposed an embodied relation with her porta-pack by conceptualizing it as an extension of her body, a prosthetic for a substitute for a sexual partner, a prosthetic for a mother-daughter relation, or a means to claim self-sufficiency. Weiss incorporated live feedback, experimented with multiple cameras and mirrors to break with the media border, to create other televisual realities where pairings of self and other shifted and alternated, as we see here with her video dances or video dance performances, which consisted of live events in public spaces in which she combines performance and video, and transform her video camera into an eye or a limb as she danced with it in her hand, filming her movements and broadcasting them to monitors and mirror reflections. Echoing Japanese-born, US-based video artist Shigeko Kubota, with whom Waze developed a close friendship, Waze conceptualized the creation of each of her videos as an act of giving birth. She named her camera, her escuincla, from the Nahuatl word for daughter, and her vagina as a site of video production, metaphorically transforming her creative process into an act of incestuous copulation with her escuincla. In doing so, she not only declared her self-sufficiency as a female video producer, taking ownership of both being the inspiration and author of all stages of production, but she also gendered all aspects of video production as female. Through playful neologisms and metaphors, she also extended her position to take an active role in the process of breaking the alienation of viewers. She conceived herself as an audiovisual guide, a Venusina, a goddess from Venus, whose mission was to extrapolate or make viewers see images, interpolate or interrupt the viewer to disrupt the narrative, and polarize, invite the viewer to reflect on what he or she saw. So this first encounter with the archive resulted in the recovery of practices, collaborations, and exchanges of a group of artists and feminist activists. Here, I just highlighted Monica Mayer's participatory installation and the work of Paula Weiss. But in the book, I also discussed the films of Film Collective Cine Mujer Mexico, the street photographers and archival practice of Ana Victoria Jimenez, which I will return to shortly, and more than a dozen feminist demonstrations by feminist collectives that were active in the 70s. All these practices combined led me to think more expansively about what constitutes an archive, how these women resignify the uses of various technologies of inscriptions, from writing, film, photography, and video, to performative interventions in the urban landscape, and how in doing so, they created different archives, both in content and in form, that accounted for changing female subjectivities in the 1970s, and created important records that would be fundamental for the continued fight against femicides and human rights violations based on gender and sexual identity. So what resulted for this encounter was not only a recovery of their voices and presence in the archive, but an understanding of the important role that feminist activists and media artists play as agents of the archive, and how by their visual productions and embodied practices construct a different range of archives, as I said, both in content and in form, from which others' histories can emerge. So then, the second encounter with the archive also began while I was doing this research, and I started to think more expansively about what an archive is. And at the time, I came across, the term reactivation as a feminist curatorial methodology through a project led by Monica Mayer and Karen Cordero that consisted of a series of intergenerational workshops with artists and university students to raise awareness on the historical value of the collections of feminist activist and artist Ana Victoria Jimenez. Jimenez's archive contained photos, documents, and ephemera documenting feminist activism in Mexico City, and at the time was housed at Jimenez House. Broadly speaking, reactivation could be understood as a concept that is related to media archaeology, which seeks to dismantle the linear narratives and temporalities of history, of media and technology, and to rescue silent histories through the recreation or forgotten or failed media and technology. But building from the 1970s activist tradition of collective and small group organizing, Mayer and Cordero's approach to reactivation goes further than media archaeology. Their approach seeks to reactivate historical memory by creating intergenerational encounters to question what constitutes an archive, who defines it, who is its agent, and how to recover the political relevance of an archive that is not considered as such as Jimenez's collection at the time. So as a result of this project, that brought a lot of visibility to this archive, and the archive is now housed at the Ibero University in Mexico City, and in February 2024, It was recognized as part of UNESCO Memory of the World, Chapter Mexico, and is currently one of the most consulted collections in the library. So reactivation for Mayer and Cordero is not only a tactic to bring awareness to the historical value of a collection that is not part of the archive with a capital A, but also a strategy to intervene in the archive from the present, making it a living archive, thus turning historical memory into political memory and a matter of social justice. So at the same time I was doing this research and being involved in this project, I gave birth to my only daughter, Sofia. And this experience of being a mother for the first time, while encountering the generosity of many artists and scholars who share their stories, their personal archives, and open their homes, to inspire me to look at my own family archives, and especially to think about forms of female socialization I had inherited and I was going to pass down to my daughter, and how I was going to pass them down while raising her in another country as a bilingual or trilingual or tricultural child. So inspired by Mayer and Cordero's project and the work of collecting and digitizing the archives of all these activists, I began to look at my own family archives and to think about the impact of digital technologies in the preservation of archives. So I remember my great-grandmother's cookbook that my mother and I used when we baked together, when I was still living in Mexico. I looked at the book not as a recipe book, but as an archive of family traditions, values, affects, and mostly as a technology that was used by 3 generations of women in my family to record female reproductive labor and gender behavioral norms. Mama Pina, the owner of the book, or the first owner of the book, was my great-grandmother, who began handwriting recipes on the book around 1918, and then handed down to my grandmother and her twin sister, and then to my mother, who continued to write cooking recipes and knitting instructions on it. The book also records other forms of writing and scribbling, possibly done by children in the many households the recipe book inhabited. Some of its pages are covered with smears and stain of foods, others are ripped, all of which are traces of lived experiences. So thinking about Jay Butler and Richard Grusing's concept of remediation, defined as, quote, logic by which media forms refashion prior media forms, I invited several colleagues and friends to respond in the media of their choice to a cooking recipe included in my great-grandmother's cookbook. To begin the project, I sent a selection of 25 recipes to 40 people via email without translation or transcription. The recipes are written in Spanish and in different styles of creative handwriting corresponding to each of the authors of the recipe book. The responses I received included recreation of recipes, digital images, audio recordings, videos, and documentations of family gatherings and conversations. These are only some of the collaborations. So the project consists of a 4-channel video art installation and a website that you can see here. The first video in the installation records my attempts at learning different handwriting styles recorded in the book. The video shows how I transcribed all the recipes, how I attempt to know these 3 generations of women in my family through this act of transcription. As Mexican writer Cristina Rivera Garza argues, transcribing, copying, or imitating other people's handwriting constitutes an embodied practice of recovering the experience of the other through our own body, of reactivating the archival source. The second video features myself cooking one of the recipes while my mother reads the recipe to me via Skype, as she was based in Mexico and I was based in Canada. The third video consists of mapping and documenting the collaborations of friends and colleagues who were invited to respond to some of the recipes from the cookbook in the media of their choice. And the fourth video is an interactive channel that invites viewers to write responses to one of the recipes in the book using a stylus pen, but these responses are not recorded but slowly disappear as the user types or draws onto the image. This disappearance was programmed to reflect on the anarchival properties of all archives. The website contains an index of all the pages in the notebook, which have been scanned and include links to all the responses, an interactive version of the video that showcases the collaborations while the user flips through the cookbook. And so by reflecting on how this recipe book was in fact an archive of sorts in which 3 generations of women in my family had recorded instructions on how to cook, but also about feminine rituals and traditions, this project complemented my understanding of the role of women as agents of the archive. By including domestic technologies and forms of recording, as well as reproductive forms of care that are passed from generation to generation, it expanded Meyer and Cordero's notion of reactivation by exploring the processual and performative qualities of the archive through digital remediation. But most importantly, the project also replicated the collaborative and haphazard methodology of writing, making, cooking, baking, tracing, doodling, sharing, and using different modes of recording proposed by all the authors of Mama Pina's cookbook to pass down knowledge from generation to generation. So drawing from the work of performative theorists Rebecca Schneider and Diane Taylor, who are interested in looking at the tensions between performative forms and recorded forms of knowledge as they are passed down from generation to generation, I observed that these tensions were present in my great-grandmother's recipe book. And this led me to explore reenactment to further investigate what Diana Taylor characterizes as the tension between the archive of supposedly enduring materials such as text, buildings, monuments, and bones, and the so-called ephemeral repertoire of embodied practices, that is, oral traditions, dances, sports, cookings, rituals, etc. So reenactment is an artistic and a historical practice that visualizes and contemporizes the past. It focuses primarily on recording events or recreating events and creating them anew. In this sense, reenactment connects to Taylor's concept of repertoire. For performance theorists Tommy DeFrance and Gustavo Di Frutado, the main characteristic of reenactment is the creation of a disturbance in the perceived linearity of time, as they state, quote, "Through corporeal repetition, the past gains a ghostly simultaneity with the present, and every repetition harbors the possibility of difference. That is, the possibility that the past may yet have another future." So the process of creating remediating Mama Pina's cookbook has been foundational to the ongoing development of the methodology of feminist research creation with a group of collaborators. This methodology builds on the concept of reactivation, understood as a call to action that seeks to intervene in the present through the activation of political memory, through intergenerational and creative engagements as developed by Meyer and Cordero. It expands Bolter and Grusin's concept of remediation by understanding it as a critical engagement with the so-called newness of digital technology, while exploring the ways in which these technologies facilitate preservation and communication, while at the same time they deeply transform our sense of self and reproduce long-standing systems of oppression. And finally, reenactment as an invitation to stage embodied and collaborative encounters to recreate events, to give our past the possibility of other futures, as DeFrance and Furtado put it. So this second encounter with the archive reinforced the pivotal role that women as agents of the archive play through the staging of collaborative and intergenerational events to reactivate political memory by centering the experience of gender reproductive work as meaningful archival practices and part of an artistic and curatorial practice that seeks to diversify the places of enunciation and the formats of articulation of the archives of media art history. So I think I'm running out of time, but I have several projects that I want to share with you that have built on this methodology. So I'm going to go through them very quickly, unless you tell me I have more time. So one of the first projects we created was a reenactment of The Real, the Virtual, and the We by Lydia Clark. Lydia Clark, best well-known performance, The I, the You, and Clothing, Body Clothing from 1967. Our project is called The Real, the Virtual, and the We. And we employed reenactment to reactivate this work because we were interested in how Clarke's explorations of the body in all its dimension through the creation of embodied and multisensory experiences in which spectators were co-creators and active participants, as she created these suits that were sensorial suits, could be relevant at a time when our social interactions are increasingly mediated through digital technologies and when the limits of the real and the virtual bodies are constantly being blurred. So the project consists of a performance, a live performance that you see here, a digital video, and an AI-generated video developed in collaboration with Steve Di Paola. The performance is by Alessandra Santos, and Sarah Shamash, Alessandra Santos, and myself recreated the suits and worked on the video editing. So like Mama Pina's cookbook project, The Real, the Virtual, and the We casted a network of collaborations and relations between artists and publics to reimagine the past, but in this case, adding computational algorithms as an integral agent and mediators of human and non-human relations. The viewers could actually go into the performance and wear one of the suits. So the integration of AI has led to a series of collaborative projects with Freya Zinoviev and Prophecy Son, in which we use the female body inscribed by the lived experience of childbearing as a metaphor to reflect on the idea of the body as an interface between self and other, as well as a site of cultural, gendered, and biopolitical inscriptions. Or in other words, on how the body is an archive of all our experiences and how, in turn, we embody and enact those experiences in our daily lives. In other works, like this one, I'm blanking on its name, but it's there. In other words, we have explored the boundaries between the biological and the digital by cultivating bacteria from domestic and natural landscapes and incorporated images of the bacteria growth in AI-generated videos and poetry. And this Bodies as Borders is the title. This was projected at an urban screen in Surrey, BC. And to finalize, I want to show our latest project. We employed the concept of mitochondria as a metaphor of another sort of archival technology that points to the possibility of tracing maternal lineages of human and non-human bodies across time to reference how information flows across bodies, machines, and geographies. So the project involved more than 10 artists. We created a series of workshops, and we created a website where all the activities from the workshops, the growing of bacteria, and people could share and create parallel projects. The idea was that we would create a collaborative choreography based on Buto, and that we would use that to create an AI-generated video with the images that collected from the workshop and from the growing of bacteria. And so this is some sections of the video. I will leave you with that. And I know I'm running out of time, so I'll just play a little bit of that. That's one section of the video that includes some AI-generated images. I'll play a little clip. And I'll play another one, and we can end here, and we can open up for questions, because I know it's late.
So keep it running, and maybe we can take some questions. Gabriela, thank you very much for this wonderful talk. It's really fascinating to have the chance to get to know your work better, and especially to see how your methodologies are transforming your new research practice and how the way you teach in Canada and other places. So we have 10 minutes for questions. So I really think we probably need to pass the mic, get 3-4 questions, and maybe you can answer all of them at the end. So who's going to start? Okay.
Or we can have questions at lunch.
Wow. Hi, Gabriela. Thank you for your presentation. I was very curious about Paula Weiss. A couple of things, like what happened to her, because I noticed, she died in '99. And the other one, if you have any information, what kind of video synthesis devices she used to create her feedbacks.
Yeah, maybe. So Paula Weiss first. Maybe we can take another question now. There. Yeah, you know, I'm still processing the presentation by Inge and your way of documenting and creating new technologies, right? And this is another way of, you know, taking these theoretical approaches and developing ways to interact with the archive. And I think this is a very interesting resonance. Please.
Okay, thank you, Gabriela, for this amazing talk. I knew about Paula Weiss thanks to your text, The Utopian Impulse in the Videos of Paula Weiss. So I have a lot of questions that I can do later about that topic. But for now, my question is about, from your perspective as researcher and practitioner, what could be your recommendation to adopt AI and these kind of technologies from a feminist and decolonial perspective?
Perfect. So first, Paula Weiss, second, AI, feminist perspective. Maybe one more. Okay, Roberta here.
Thank you so much. I'm very interested in the relationship between the archive as capital A and archive as little a, in part because when I was actually, I find part of this presentation very moving because I also have the recipe books of my grandmother, and I see a lot of resonances between this. And so I've been thinking about the thread that goes across different cultures and also different traditions and different generations of women. And I'm wondering what you're thinking about it. It's just a comment. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe we can stop taking questions here. And just before we leave, a reminder that this afternoon from 3 p.m. on, the meetings will be at the Parque Tecnológico Villa María. They will be buses provided for transportation, okay? So please, Gabriela.
So the first question on Paula Weiss, when I was doing this research, it was in the process of being transferred to the university, so not of all her personal things were digitized. Some of the videos had been digitized by TV UNAM and were there, but they were not transferred from platform they were not available or taken care of. So I was able to access the archive before it was passed to to Arqueya, where it's now in Mexico City. And she has a very interesting story because unfortunately she took her own life, and the fact that she did so was like it happens with many artists, became a myth. And so that talking and reproducing this myth really took from actually looking at her work and what were her contributions. So people were just like, "Ooh, she's the artist that's suicide," you know, but they were not looking at her intellectual contributions. And as I mentioned, she was a professor. She directed various theses. She was a very, very important advocate of video technology. She didn't have a lot of access to a lot of fancy editing equipment, and so some of the ways in which she created effects were with like crystal balls, very hands-on. I don't know the name of the image synthesizer that she had to create those weird kind of chroma keyed and interesting kind of effects, but I have it, so I will get back to you. But it was very hands-on, so it was a lot of having her crafting and editing using mirrors like many other video artists were doing, like playing with those reflections and feedback. And she had several cameras to produce the live feedback. The interview with Shigeko Kubota is very fun because there's two cameras and they're both talking to each of the other camera, and there's like completely live feedback. It's like a circuit of them talking through the cameras and then getting the feedback. Since I've done this research, there's a lot of attention given to Paula Weiss. There's actually a documentary produced by Alejandra Arrieta, which is actually playing right now because it's the anniversary of Paula Weiss' birth, sorry. Talking about mythification, this month. So it's playing on Mexican television, the documentary right now. So a lot of things have happened since I did this research, so. Thanks for asking. And the other question, well, it was related to Paula Weiss, right? So I think I responded. how to adopt AI. Yeah, so exactly. This is something that I've been thinking a lot about, and I have a lot of I like to think that I learn from the artists that I research, so I think that keeping the human on the loop is very important, and so that's the methodology that I use with Steve Di Paola, who is my collaborator with AI. We always create works in which we are constantly intervening, so the AI becomes an agent in this process, in this circuit of communication, but it's not the creator, the sole creator, so it's a collaborator. Having said that, I don't use it in all my projects. I don't think it should be used in all projects. I don't think we should use it for everything. I think there are specific uses for it, and so it just depends on the creative process. But yeah, that's my position on AI, and informed by a feminist practice of actually keeping the human and understanding how it also is a source of a lot of energy, right? And it has environmental consequences, so we don't really need it. Yeah. I think that was all, right? Or Ms. Nat? Thank you. Yeah.
So it's noon sharp. We're respectful with the time of the people in the streaming. So I just want to say again, thank you very much. Gracias, muchas gracias, Gabriela, por tu presentación. Just a couple of reminders. Tomorrow in this same keynote sessions, we will have Professor Manthia Diaguara, who just arrived from New York to Manizales. In 2 days, we will have Esteban Garcia, and we will close with Chris Salter next Friday. After this, we will have an hour for lunch, and then there is a presentation by Jose Carlos Mariategui here, right? In the same 1:45. So, and in the afternoon, the session will be again, right, 3 p.m. in Parque Tecnológico. Buses will be provided to go there. Thanks again for your attention. It's been a wonderful morning.